Okay, so have you ever wondered what it takes to physically develop a Bootstrap navigation system? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. By the way, this video is part of a huge development video where I show you exactly how to develop a website from start to finish using Bootstrap, as well as Docker, as well as Gulp, so anything and everything in between. Now in this video though, I'm going to show you exactly how to create that Bootstrap navigation, and we are going to use a yoga fitness studio website. And on top of that, I also have a link in the description below how I designed this entire website using Figma, and then as I said, the development, how I develop everything. Now, one thing I do want to say is this video is ideal if you are new to Bootstrap, and even if you're a pro. There's some good tips and tricks that I have included in this video that can definitely help you to build out that Bootstrap navigation quite quickly. Now, with all that said, let's jump into it. Let me show you exactly how to do this. Alright, so in this chapter, as I said, we are creating the main navigation or the nav, Bootstrap nav, and we are going to create this specific one. And I'm going to jump between the two prototypes, by the way. We are going to jump between prototype 1 and prototype 3, and maybe, just maybe, prototype 2 as well. So between the combination of 1, 3, and 2. Now, normally the project sponsor or the owner or even your client would make that decision, would make the decision of which prototype they're going to go for. But because this is a demonstration, we'll just, play around and create whatever we think is the best prototype out of all of them. Again, if you've joined this video right now, make sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I truly appreciate that. Everything is in the description below. This design and this development is both on GitHub and on the Figma community. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to navigate back to my Visual Studio, and you can see that we still have the Node.js running and we still have our Docker running. So everything is still good. And at this stage, what I want to do now, before we do anything else, I want to check in my source code. So first off, I'm just going to say that we created base. So I'm going to say base creation. And you can add whatever you want over here. I'm just going to go ahead and submit. I'm just going to hit sync. It's super important to make sure you check in your code on a regular basis, just to make sure that when you work in a team that you guys are working together. Also, you want to make sure that you are committing, syncing, and submitting to the right branch. At the bottom left of Visual Studio, it will show you which branch you are working on. All right, so with that, we are going to close everything down. So I'm going to close all of my open tabs, and I like to do that. I like to start fresh every time. So I'm going to open up index.html, and we're going to start by adding the navigation. So to start the navigation, I like to use Bootstrap documentation as much as possible. Why reinvent the wheel if the wheel is already invented, right? So we're going to make sure that we navigate to the docs of Bootstrap, and you can do that by just opening up a new tab. If you don't have that open, you can say getbootstrap.com/docs, and everything is going to be there. Always make sure that you are on the latest docs, which is 5.3 when this video was recorded. All right, so when you have the documentation, when you're at the first page, we're going to navigate down on the left-hand side, and we're going to look for nav. Nav is the one that we want, and if you can't find it here, you can also search or use the search box at the top, which I normally use, by the way. And we are going to search for navbar. We're going to hit the first one that it shows, and we want to look for a great nav that we can use. So I'm just going to scroll down until I can find something that's going to work for what we are trying to do here. And you know what? I'm going to use the very first or the second one. Honestly, scrolling through all of this, I like this one right here. It is very simplistic. It's very straightforward. So what I want to do is I want to copy this code to my clipboard. So I'm going to hit the little copy there, and we're going to navigate back to our Visual Studio, and we're going to drop that into our index.html. So what we have here is we have the body tags. I'm going to get rid of all this because we're not going to use that. We're going to get rid of that, and we're going to drop in what we just copied. So let me just quickly go through what we copied. So we essentially opened up nav tags, and we are using classes navbar, and we are using navbar expand LG. So what does that mean? What does navbar expand LG means? So navbar expand LG means that the actual breakpoint from mobile menu to desktop menu is going to happen on the LG breakpoint. So if you don't know what LG breakpoint is, let's quickly navigate back to documentation, and we're going to type in breakpoints just so I can show you what I mean. So when you navigate to the breakpoints, it's going to show you exactly at what pixels, what dimensions, what width is going to do what. So if you are going to use LG, that means that at exactly 992 pixels, so if the screen or if the browser size is 992, it's actually going to switch. And as we go through this project, we are going to use breakpoints a lot, and I will explain more, or I will try to explain more as we go through the process. So going back to Visual Studio, we are using navbar expand LG, so it means that at 992, it will move from mobile menu to our desktop menu. Perfect. So the next part, it says BG body tertiary, which in our case, we're not going to use that because we are going to have a transparent background. If we go back to our Figma, just real quick, we can see that there is no background color for this navigation. So we are going to use BG transparent when we are declaring our navigation. So I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to type in BG transparent. All right, so the next div, it says container fluid. So you get two types of containers. You get container and container fluid. In the design video that I have, I explain it in detail. Check the description below. I go through exactly what's the difference between container and container fluid. But in this case, if we go back to our design, we can see that our navigation sticks within the container. So yes, the navigation stretch from left to right, but it is inside of the actual container constraint. So we definitely going to use container instead of container fluid. So let's navigate back to Visual Studio. We're going to change container fluid to container. And next we have navbar brand. So navbar brand is physically referring to the logo. So in our case, we are going to change this to an IMG. We're going to add the logo that we have for this yoga fitness website. So I'm going to type in IMG and we're going to say SRC. Now, what we need to do is export the logo from our Figma file. And what we want to do, and we want to do this correctly, because if you don't do this correctly, you are going to end up with either a pixelated or bloated logo or icon or whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to zoom in and we're going to click on our actual group. I'm just going to make the group or the layers a little bit bigger. There we go. That's a little bit bigger. That's perfect. So I want to select the primary logo as it is right here. And one thing I like to do before I export anything, especially when it comes to text, especially if I want to export it as an SVG, we want to make sure that we flatten the text. Otherwise, you are going to end up with some complications, specifically with the text itself. So what we're going to do, first off, we need to detach this from this specific asset or variable instance. So I'm going to right click on it and we're going to say detach instance. I want to select Great Fitness and we are going to outline stroke. So when you outline stroke, you're going to notice that it's changing it to a bunch of vectors. That's what we want because we're exporting this as an SVG. I'm going to do the same for Yoga Studio and we're going to select outline stroke. Okay, perfect. So now it is a bunch of vectors. It's a bunch of objects, which is perfect. Now we are going to select primary logo and we're going to export this. So I'm going to hit export. I'm going to select SVG. We're going to export it. Now you won't see the export box, by the way, and we're going to go back to Visual Studio and we would need to add that into the actual Visual Studio file, and we're going to add it in the IMG folder within SRC. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. So if you want to follow me and do it as well, and I've just done it right there. When you import an SVG into Visual Studio Code, it will normally open up the actual SVG code. Why are we using SVG? Well, SVG is way smaller than PNG and JPEG, but not just that, it is also super crisp and super clear because it's physically code, right? It's physically code that you're using. One thing that you are going to notice is nothing's going to happen because at the end of the day, we need the image to actually move to our dist folder. To do that, we need to modify our Gulp and add a task to be able to handle SVG files. Let's open up the Gulp file MJS. And there's a few things that I've noticed. I quickly scanned through this and I've noticed that we need to add one or two things. But first off, I want to add a task specifically for SVG. So I'm going to copy any task, and it doesn't need to be a specific task. You can copy any task. And we just going to change the comment. I'm just going to say SVG conversion, and I am going to rename the task. I'm just going to call it SVG, and we want to change these file extensions to go and look for .svg, Perfect. I'm going to hit save. And down here in my watch task, I'm just going to duplicate the last one. We're going to change that PNG to SVG. And the same year, we're just going to refer it back to the task that we just created. I'm going to hit save. Next, I'm going to go to wherever my terminal is, where I have the node running, the npm start. I'm going to terminate that by hitting Control C and just stopping everything. One thing I notice, and what I do want to add, is the actual WebP quality. I have mentioned it earlier in the video. When you convert any type of image, whether it be PNG or JPEG, you need to set what is the actual quality. I am going to look for WebP. I'm just going to search for the first WebP, and we are going to add within the task itself, underneath the return above the pipe, I'm going to add another pipe, and we're just going to say WebP, and the quality that I'm going to go for, and we can play around with this, by the way, the quality I'm going to go for is 98. We can play around with it. If the image size is too large, we need to go and modify this. But I always start with 98 and see how that goes. We need to do the same for the PNG as well. So I'm just going to paste that in there as well. And now that we've done this, I'm going to hit save. And going back to my terminal, I am going to hit the up button and I'm going to run npm start. Let's give that a sec so it can do its thing. And that normally takes a second or two for it to get up and running. All right, so now it's up and running. We can see that it has built successfully. Everything has compiled successfully. Now we need this IMG to be able to move itself over to the distribution. Now, one quick way to do this is you can open up the SVG and maybe just give it a space and just hit save. So what I did, give it space, give it a little backspace and hit save again. You'll notice that it moved everything for us to the distribution. So when I open up the IMG under the dist folder, we can see that the primary logo is there. Okay, perfect. Now, when we add this to our HTML, we are going to assume that we are working from the dist. We are just going to type in IMG and we are going to say primary logo, and you'll see that Visual Studio Code already shows that to us, which is super awesome to see. So I'm going to click that, or going to press enter, and we're going to hit save. I just want to make sure that everything is working the way it is. And yeah, our server is still up and running, which is really good. So let's head over to the browser and let's have a look. Let's see if it actually did what we want it to do. So I'm going to navigate to our website. We're going to hit refresh and it is broken for some reason. So we need to figure out why this is. And it's most likely a Flask issue that we need to go and fix. I just figured out why this is not working, and the reason it's not working is because we are using Docker container and Flask in conjunction with each other, and for it to work properly, we need to do something similar as what we did with our script here at the top with the bundle.js. So I am going to take this and we're going to copy, and it is specifically to do with where the static file is located within the Flask server. So with that, I'm going to paste it where the image src is, and we're going to take this IMG primary logo that we added previously. I'm going to cut that. I'm going to put that in there, hit save, and we're going to navigate over to the browser, and you're going to notice that it is working the way it should be. So perfect, that is working. And we can also see that our navigation is now added, but we need to add the navigation, or we need to change the navigation so that the text is centered in the middle and not centered or not left aligned for that matter. So to do that, we are going to make a few changes to our code. And the first thing I normally like to do is look at the actual navbar collapse. So the navbar collapse is where the meat is. That's where everything is. That's where everything resides. So we are going to modify this a little bit so that we can get what we want. Now, there are multiple different ways of doing this. And some people would say that, this is the correct way or that is the correct way. But to be honest, you need to go whatever works best for you, whatever works best for your project or the current website that you're working on. But in this instance, we are going to do it as follows. So we have our navigation here. We have navbar nav. And within that, we have home features, pricing, and disable. And when we go back, you can see that it's right there, home features, pricing, and a button that's disabled. So we need to first off get this menu to be in the center, and we need to add a button on the right hand side. So when I go back to the design and I zoom out a little bit, you're going to notice that the menu navigation is here in the middle, and we have that shop now button on the right hand side. So to do that, we're going to go back to the code here, and we're going to start by copying our link right here, and we're going to paste it outside of the navbar nav. Now, again, this is just one way of doing it. There's multiple ways of doing it, But once I've done that, I'm just gonna say, and I'm just gonna change this text to shop now. All right, so with that done, we are gonna go to nav bar, nav, and we're gonna type in MX Auto. Just gonna hit save and let's see how that works. So you can see I added an MX Auto, and M is for margin, X is for on the X axis, and auto means that it will automatically push the content to the most furthest side that it can possible. And because it's in the container, it will stay in the container, which is perfect. So now we essentially have the logo on the left-hand side, we have the menu items in the center, and we have shop now on the right-hand side. So later on throughout this video, we will look at the mobile first. Now I know that there is, when it comes to Bootstrap, they always say that, you got to code mobile first. I kind of do both. I look at desktop first and then I look at mobile. I want to get everything done prior to jumping into mobile. So that's definitely what we're going to do. All right, so navigating back, we have our logo on the left, we have our menu in the middle, and we have the button on the right. So let's go and start changing these menu items to what it needs to be. So we have home, services, and our facility. So let's do that first. Let's start with home. So we have home here. Our services is the next one. And I'm just going to type in our services. Perfect. I think the next one, honestly, I can't remember, but it's our facility. So I just always double click and I copy, makes life so much easier. Just going to clean everything up nicely. We're going to hit save. We're going to navigate back and we are going to refresh, and boom, we have the base up and running. So we have home, services, our facility, about, and contact us. Now I want to work on that actual button. So looking at the link that we added here, I'm going to get rid of that disabled. We want to get rid of that. All right, so with that all done, we're going to take this shop now and we're going to add a couple of classes in here. So first off, I want that to be a button and I want it to be button primary. So let's start there. Let's see how that looks like. Navigating back, we're going to hit refresh and absolutely nothing happens. So we got to figure out why that is. So I think one of the key things is that some of the button is kind of working. So this is part of development, by the way. Part of development is always trying to figure out why certain things are not working the way it's supposed to. So I'm going to navigate back and let's have a look. I think it is perhaps the nav link that's causing it. So I'm going to get rid of the nav link because we're not in the nav bar nav anymore. We're going to get rid of that and we are going to hit refresh, and there we go. We have the base button up and running, which is a good sign. Next, I want to start adding the actual icon. Now, just a little side note, we will start messing about with the actual variables of the buttons here after we have the base up and running for navigation. That's why I'm not really worried about the actual padding of the button itself, or the size of the font size, or even the weight of the font for that matter. And the same goes for the actual navigation. At this point, the navigation is quite small. It's not exactly what it's supposed to be. You can see that our navigation here might be a little thicker. It's got a medium font size, where over here it's super thin, but we will change that once we have this little icon in there. So let's go back. I want to take this icon and we want to make sure it's a vector at the bottom, and I'm just going to change the name for it. I'm just going to say basket, and we are going to export it as an SVG. Perfect. So basket SVG is added into our IMG, and you'll notice that our Gulp task runner has automatically took our basket.svg and moved it over to the distribution, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. Now, navigating back, we are going to grab this guy right here. We're just going to copy that because we're going to use that, and we are going to add an IMG within this. I am going to literally copy this whole IMG and not just the link itself. It's going to make life a little easier there. And we're going to change this. We're going to change that to basket. Now, one thing that we haven't done yet, which is super crucial, is we need to add alt text for our images. That is super crucial. And the second thing that is also crucial, and this comes down to that entire developing a website for lean performance, is we need to add the width and height. That is something that Lighthouse takes a look at when you develop a website. It always wants you to define the width and height. It doesn't want to do it itself. So we're going to quickly do that. We are going to go back to the actual logo and we're going to add the width and height here real quick. So the width and height, when I click on everything, it says 199.44 and 31. So I'm going to round that off and go for 199 and 39. So going back to Visual Studio, we're going to add a width there, and that's going to be 199, and we're just going to add px. and we're going to give it a height, and it is, as far as I know, it is 39. So we're going to say 39 and finish it off with a PX. Always make sure that you have the PX there as well. Last but not least, we want to add an alt text. So I'm just going to say yoga fitness website logo. Now, when you develop a website to be SEO efficient, and ranking is an important part of it, you want to do the research first before start adding the alt text, but you never want to forget to add the alt text. And that's one thing that a lot of developers do. They forget to add the alt text to images. So when it comes to the actual ranking of the website, it's not doing that great. Always make sure that you do that, and always make sure you add the width and height. So we're going to do the same for basket as well. I'm also going to add a width and height. So I'm going to go back to Figma, and I just want to see what is the width and height. So the width and height here is basically 14. So we're going to stick with 14. And there's a little trick that you can do as well, is when you're in a situation like that where you have the height at a 0.4 or 0.55 in this case variable, then you can also use 100% on the actual height as well, and that will ensure that whatever image you are using is actually going to be perfect. So the aspect ratio would be perfect, so it won't skew or it won't distort or anything like that. Also, I'm going to add an alt text here, and I'm just going to say shopping basket for yoga studio. Now, again, this isn't the 100% way of creating alt text. I will definitely drop a video at some point where I explain exactly how to properly populate alt text so that it works for accessibility purposes, but it also works for search engine optimization. But the key thing here is to always make sure that you remember to add width and height and alt text, because if you don't, and we get to the point where we take Lighthouse and do a performance test on the website, you're going to notice that, hey, I am losing a lot of points because I didn't add width and height and I didn't add alt. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're going to hit save here, and we are going to refresh and see what's going on. All right, so I can see that I have my icon there, but notice that it's not that great. Like if I zoom in and have a look at this, that is not great. I can see that the shop now and the actual icon is not right in the center, which is pretty normal to see. And there's a few ways of fixing that. So going back to Visual Studio, one thing I like to do, I never want text to just dangle in an actual div or in anything for that matter. So I'm just going to open that up, and we are going to add span to this. Now, a quick thing with Visual Studio is you can literally just type it out and hit tab, and it will automatically create the tags for you. I'm just going to paste shop now in there. Next, I want to add a deflex. So I want to change this button into a deflex, and I want to say align items center. I just want to make sure that I spelled that correctly. That looks good. And we can add justify content center. Again, what I'm using here is deflex. So if you go to the Bootstrap website, and I'll probably drop a video at some point also explaining flex a little bit more, but when we go to actual flex and using flex behavior, you'll notice that the cheat sheet is right here. So if you want something to center, you're always going to use justify content center. That is if it's a deflex and a flex row and a flex column, as well as align items. And this is what we just used here. We used align item center because when you look at this, for example, you can see that this items in here, these flex items are right in the center on the vertical axis, and that's exactly what we're trying to do here. Now, when I hit refresh, you're going to see that the icon is nicely in the center of the actual text itself, but we still need to add a little bit of spacing between the actual icon and shop now. That is way too tight as it is right there. So I'm just going to zoom out and let's navigate back to Visual Studio, and we're going to add a gap in here. So I'm going to start with perhaps gap 2 and see how that goes. Again, look at the documentation, look at how gaps work. Gaps are super powerful, and it's super great to use for situations like this. So I'm going to hit refresh, and we're going to see that we have a great little gap there. Now, before I actually continue fine-tuning this button, I want to work on the actual width and height variables of the button itself to make sure that it is 100%. So I'm going to navigate back, and we just want to see that when we look at the two, so when I look at this button right here, and I look at this right here, the actual padding around the items within the button is not 100%. So let's go and change that. So to do that, we need to modify the actual variables. So let's work from the actual documentation this time and not use the underscore variables folder. We can use the actual button page on Bootstrap itself. So I'm going to scroll down right to the bottom until we can get to the SAS variables. And as I'm zooming in here, you can see that we have button padding Y and button padding X. Another thing that you're going to notice is that it is attached to input button padding Y and input button padding X. Now, this is where things get a little tricky, or just a situation where you need to think about it before you make any changes, because if you are going to modify button padding X and button padding Y and change it from input button padding X and input button padding Y, then when you get to the point where you are modifying or working with your forms, you might have inconsistencies with the buttons itself. So in our case, we are not going to actually modify button padding X and button padding Y, but we are going to modify input button padding X and input button padding Y. So I'm not 100% sure how we can get to that on the Bootstrap website itself, but I am going to open up the variables folder. So we are going to go to our node modules and we're going to look for Bootstrap, which is sometimes super cumbersome. And we're just going to scroll down. I've got it right here, open up SCSS, and we're going to look for variables. You can also search it at the top. All right, so once we have this open and we navigate back to the browser here, I just want to copy this guy right here, and we are going to go back to our variables folder and we're going to search for it real quick. In the variables folder, I'm going to hit Control F and we're going to search for that. And we can see here that we have 0.375 rem and we also have 0.75 rem. So I'm going to take both of these and we're going to copy it and we're going to go back to our actual custom variables. And at the bottom here, we're going to open up new comments and we're just going to say button settings, or you can also say form/button settings. And we're going to drop that in there. Get rid of the default as per usual. Always, again, get rid of the default. And we just want to get rid of the spacing as well. It's sometimes super annoying, but it is what it is. Okay, now that we have this, we need to look at what is the actual spacing on our design itself. So I'm going to go back to the design and we are going to have a peek at this. One thing you can do is open up development or the dev mode. And when you open up the dev mode and you hover over certain things, it will show you exactly what is the actual spacing. And it looks like it's showing it in rem, which is super cool. This is, by the way, a brand new feature of Figma, which I freaking love. This is super awesome because this saves so much time. Back in the day, we had to use, and I'm going to say back in the day, like a month ago, back in the day, we had to use actual rem converters, and you had to go to a different website and you had to go grab it and you had to convert it. But now it's just right here. So what we can see on the x-axis is 1 rem, and on the y-axis it's 0.62. So that's what we got to need to change. So x-axis 1 rem. So let's navigate back to Visual Studio there, and we are going to change it and go back to my variables here because I am custom vars right there. And the x-axis, we need to change this to 1 rem. And the other one is, I think it was 6.2. So I want to change that to 6.2. All right, so we're going to hit save and we're going to go to our node here at the bottom, make sure that everything is compiling. Yeah, everything compiled successfully, which is good. And I'm going to hit refresh and you'll notice that the button kind of increased a little bit, which is good. That's exactly what we want. Next, we need to check the spacing between the actual icon and shop now. So the spacing we have right now is gap 2. We want to make sure that it is consistent. So gap 2, what we have here is 0.62. So 0.62, 0.62, and 0.62. So we need to go figure out what is the spacing. Now, to be honest, I am just going to shoot it by eye, make sure that it's 100%. So let's maybe look at gap 3 and see how that might look like. I want to navigate back to Visual Studio Code, and we want to go back to the index there, and we want to change this to gap 3. All right, so I just hit save, and we are going to refresh it, and let's have a look at that. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I think it's not 100% there yet, but it is super, super close. When I look at this button, you can see the spacing it just looks a little better. I feel like the spacing is too much. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go back to gap 2 and we're going to stick with gap 2. So when I go back here, we're going to change that to gap 2. And again, this is part of design. This is part of development. It's constant back and forth until you get something that really looks good. All right, so another thing that I want to change is the actual font thickness or the font weight of our buttons itself. So going back to the variables, I want to search for button. And again, you can also either do it here or you can do it on the Bootstrap documentation. I'm just so used to doing it over years. So, I've been doing it for years this way. So I just, you memorize this variable folder, you actually memorize that in your sleep. So, I've kind of get used to where everything is. So I have button BTN font weight here, and we can see that it's font weight normal. So I want to copy this, and we are going to go and put it in our custom var folder. Now we got to figure out what is the actual weight that we have available for this project itself. So let's type in weight. I am going to scroll up here because on the right hand side, you can see these little orange dots or little lines. That's where it's all located. So I want to start right at the top. And here we can see we have lighter, light, and so it kind of goes on. And when we look at medium, it's 500. So we want to use font weight medium. So I'm going to take this and we're going to copy this and we're going to add it to our actual variables. I just want to close it right here by adding semicolon. Now, one thing I noticed is it doesn't know what we're talking about. So it's saying that it doesn't recognize what font weight medium is, which is pretty normal because the variables folder is below our custom var. So we just need to define this. So what I normally do is I take this, I'll copy it, put it in our declaration. And sometimes when a project gets super big, by the way, I would add a custom file, a custom CSS file where I pre-declare everything pre-hand. But because this is going to be a very basic project, we're not going to do it that way. But what I want to do now is I just want to add it right here. And we're just going to say font declaration. I'm just going to hit save, and that should fix our problem. So we're going to give it a second here and it will fix everything. There we go. Everything is minimized. So when we go back to our website and we hit refresh, you're going to see that the font weight is kind of where we want it right now. So this looks pretty good. We're getting there for sure. All right. So before we fix that little gap, I want to look at this navigation right here. And what I want to do is go to Figma, and we want to see what kind of weight we have been using here. So the font size of 1 rem, which is good. Font weight 500. So we got to do the same for that as well. So we got to set it to medium. When I zoom out here and I go to the actual home, we just want to see what that is all about. So that is 600. And the spacing between these are 2.81. So we also got to set that and make sure that's 100%. So let's start off with the medium. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code, and we want to make sure that we set the medium on the actual navigation as well. Now there's two ways of doing it. One way is you can do it through the index.html. So you can physically add FW medium or FW semi bold over here, but I am going to do it through the actual variables. So in the variables, we're just going to search for nav. We're going to see nav link. I'm just going to scroll down and see what we have. Nav link, nav tabs, nav bar, so nav bar X, Y, and we have nav bar light, nav bar dark. We're not using nav bar light, nav bar dark in this situation because we don't really need it for the specific project that we are doing. So I'm scrolling up. I want to take the actual nav link section. I want to modify this. So let's start off by looking for the actual weight. So we have it right here, font weight, and by default is set to nil. So we're going to take this and we're going to copy it. We're going to go to our custom bars. We're going to drop it in here. And again, we're going to take this font weight normal and we're going to paste it in there as well. And we're going to add a little semicolon, hit save. We're just going to wait for this thing to compile, which it just did. Going to our actual browser and we hit refresh, we can see that, hey, that looks pretty good. Now the next step is to add that spacing that we need to add. So going back to Figma, we just want to see that spacing. That spacing is 2.81. So we want to go and make sure that the spacing over here is also going to be 2.81. Going back to variables, we want to go to underscore variables, and I just quickly want to switch my screen, and there we go. Going back to variables, we just want to change that. So there's a couple of things that you got to keep in mind here. You have navbar link padding X and navbar link padding Y, but when you scroll down, you're also going to notice that you have nav link padding X, and that's the one that we want to change. This is the padding of each link, where this is the padding between everything. And sometimes, when I develop, I do forget to select this one and I select the other one, and sometimes that takes forever to figure that out, but that is part of experience. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to drop that in. And one thing I noticed though is we've been dropping everything in with form button settings. So I just want to add a little comment here, and I'm just going to say nav settings perfect. And we are going to add this, and just going back to Figma just to confirm, we want to add 2.81, perfect. So going back to Visual Studio Code, we are going to add in 2.81 rem. We're going to hit save, and we're going to give it a second just to compile again, and we're going to navigate back to our browser. We're going to hit refresh and let's see what happens. Oh, that is way too much. So there's definitely a inconsistency, and I know what it is. It's the spacing of your nav, and I'm just going to go back to the variables here. So what's happening here is this nav bar padding, which is the padding between each item, and this nav padding is conflicting with each other. So essentially what you're getting is 1 plus 2.8. So we're ending up with 3. So what we need to do is go back to our custom var, and we're just going to change this to 1. So subtracting that, and we're going to wait for this thing to compile. And once it's compiled, we can navigate back to the browser. We can hit refresh, and that looks exactly what we want. A lot of times you gotta just look at it and you gotta change or modify based on how you feel. I know that sounds super weird, but I feel like we need to decrease this just a little bit, because when I look at the actual design and I look at the actual browser, I feel like we need to probably decrease that just a tiny bit. So let's go ahead and do that. Going back to our Visual Studio Code, we are just going to change this. I think I'm going to go with 1.5, and I'm just not 1.2, 1.5, and we're going to hit save, and let's see how that looks like. Now I am going to wait for it to compile, and yeah, that looks good. I like that. Looks pretty good. All right, so now that we have the base navigation up and running, we need to add some icons so that the user knows that there would be some great content below. Later on in this video, I'm not going to do it right now, but later on in this video, we're also going to style in the drop-down menu, so make sure that you stay tuned. And if you are watching one of the videos that's only focusing on the actual navigation, make sure to check out the full video. And by the way, while you're still at it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. I would truly appreciate it. All right, so let's go ahead and add the icons. So we're going to do it with SVG icons. Again, when this is an actual website that I'm developing for a client, I would normally use Font Awesome, but for simplicity purposes, we'll use the SVG. In Figma itself, I am going to select the icon here and make sure that you're in dev mode, because it makes life so much easier. I'm going to export it, and we're going to change it to SPG. But before I export it, I am just going to check the name of this icon. Arrow down. Yeah, that's pretty good. Naming convention looks good. So I'm just going to hit export, and we're going to export this. All right, so now that we've exported that, we got to add it obviously into our project itself. I'm just going to scroll up to this node modules. Oh man, that's so many of them. So I'm just going to minimize that for a second there. And we are going to drag in the IMG. There we go. I just dragged it in. And as you've noticed, as we drag it in, it automatically puts it in our distribution, which is perfect. I'm going to close it down here, and we are going to copy this image right here by saving a lot of time by doing that. And we are going to go to services, and I'm just going to open this up, add that in there, and we're just going to change the basket. We need to change that to arrow down, or whatever you called yours. Next, I want to take services, I want to cut it, and I want to put it in its own span. So I'm just going to type in span, and we're going to drop that in there. When we do that, we just want to do the same as what we did here. So we want to take the deflex, align center, and gap 2, and we want to add it in there as well. Now that we've done that, a few things that we need to do, the width and height. I just want to go back to Figma and just make sure that the width and height of this object is what we want it to be. So it's 14 by 14, perfect. So that's exactly what we want. And then the last thing is just the alt text. So we just want to make sure that we change the alt text to something like arrow down for services, something like that, super basic. All right, so now that we've done that, we can go back to the actual browser. We can hit refresh and see what we have. So that looks okay. It looks a little small to me. And it also looks like it's not properly centered. So what we need to do is we just got to fine tune this a little bit. But before we do that, I just want to add the arrow to our facility as well, so that the user knows that we have a physical drop down here. Now, one thing I want to add, and probably going to get comments in the YouTube video for sure, is yes, I know that when you add a drop down item, it will automatically add the arrow for you. But I'm trying to focus on simplicity here. And when we add the actual dropdown, we will change this actual dropdown icon, and we will modify it via the variables. But for now, I'm just going to drop it in here. And I normally do that just so that when I showcase to the client, when I'm halfway through development, they kind of know what I'm doing. So I am going to do the same for our service as well. So I'm going to copy this whole thing and we're just going to drop it in here. Perfect. And I'm just going to take our facility, cut it, and we're going to put it in there and we're going to hit save, go back to the browser. I think I didn't hit save. Yeah, I did not. All right. We're going to hit refresh and I have a little S that ended up being there. So we just got to get rid of that. Hit save, go back to the browser. Hey, welcome to being a developer. This happens a lot. This kind of stuff is constantly something that happens. All right. So now we have the base navigation up and running. So next up, the slider.